Have you ever heard of a moment so unsettling that it stops you in your tracks? Imagine reaching out for help in your darkest hour, only to be met with someone quietly suggesting you might consider ending it all. Today we are diving headfirst into the shocking story of how some Canadian Armed Forces veterans, searching for relief from the torment of post-traumatic stress disorder, found themselves offered medical assistance in dying. What is truly happening here, and how has it managed to shake an entire nation's faith in the very institutions meant to care for its bravest? Prepare yourself, because this tale is not for the faint of heart. Our main topic: the stunning intersection of a mental health crisis among veterans and a healthcare system's perplexing readiness to promote euthanasia as a supposed solution. Yes, you heard that right. By the end of this exploration, we will see how this dilemma has caused outrage, confusion, and a sense of betrayal among those who once put their lives on the line to defend their country. In this script, you will learn about some alarming offers made by Veterans Affairs Canada, stories shared by courageous individuals who served with pride, and why even politicians far beyond Canada are sounding the alarm. In this episode, we will uncover several pressing questions. How did euthanasia become such an accessible option in Canada for people grappling with mental health conditions? Why would a government department, established to honor and corral the needs of veterans, ever consider guiding men and women in uniform toward assisted death? We will also discuss the potential consequences of such suggestions, what some veterans have said in response, and how this debate is rippling across policy discussions in other countries, particularly in the United Kingdom. So, buckle up. We are about to embark on a journey that reveals just how fragile our systems can be when compassion is overshadowed by disturbing forms of efficiency. Long before we dive into the gritty details, let us set the stage. The country is Canada, a place that many around the world recognize for its universal health care, breathtaking landscapes, and strong social programs. Yet, behind this seemingly pristine exterior, there lurks a story that is anything but serene. As many people know, Canada legalized euthanasia and assisted dying in the mid-2010s, specifically in the second half of that decade. Nodding to a broader push for compassion for those in terminal conditions, the Canadian government passed legislation known officially as Medical Assistance in Dying, shortened sometimes simply to the phrase MAID. At first, the law was designed to help those facing incurable, grievous, and irreversible conditions. But over time, stories emerged that this assistance was expanding in ways that left some Canadians, and certainly watchers around the globe, more than a little uneasy. Now, let us talk about the crucial bit. Ex-soldiers, men and women, who laid their bodies on the line to protect the freedoms we take for granted. They come back from war-torn conflict zones with scars that are not always visible on a medical scan. Post-traumatic stress disorder can be a painfully isolating condition. It can awaken night terrors, cause crippling bouts of anxiety, and instill an unshakable sense of dread in the midst of everyday life. Many veterans in Canada rely on Veterans Affairs Canada for counseling, therapy, and help reintegrating into civilian life. They call the department's helplines in moments of desperation, reaching out for a lifeboat in the midst of a raging storm. Yet, in recent years, we have begun to hear about phone calls that went horribly off-script. People who served 2 tours in places like Afghanistan, who returned home traumatized by the horrors they witnessed, found themselves verbally offered medical assistance in dying when they contacted Veterans Affairs Canada for help. Consider the shocking account of one veteran, a man named David Baltzer, who said that during one of his darkest seasons, right around the winter holidays, he reached out to the department for support. Instead of comfort or a signpost directing him toward specialized therapy, he allegedly heard the voice on the line ask, "Have you thought about medical-assisted suicide?" The impact of that question was immediate. Capturing it in his own words, he expressed something like, "It made me wonder if they really wanted to help me, or if they were slowly grooming me to say, 'All right, sure, let us just end it here.'" Let that land for a moment. This scene is like a perverse twist in an already tragic drama. A soldier at his wit's end, grappling with nightmares, shame, and substance abuse, calling the one place that is meant to give him hope, only to have them dangle euthanasia in front of him as a viable path forward. The heartbreak in that realization is almost too much to stomach, but it underscores the real, tangible sense of betrayal that many veterans began to feel. The question echoing in their minds, is the system giving up on me? Instead of bridging me to help, Are they telling me that the final exit might be the best route? It does not stop with one veteran. A retired corporal named Christine Gauthier, who once competed in the 2016 year's Paralympics in Rio de Janeiro, told a House of Commons committee in Canada about a letter she received regarding a request of hers for a stair lift. Rather than focusing on solutions for her mobility issue, a helpful caseworker wrote something that essentially offered her the possibility of euthanasia. That is right. A soldier who once proudly represented her nation in a global athletic competition, trying to get a square deal from the government, was somehow guided to consider ending her life altogether. She later testified that the letter mentioned she was free to request medical assistance in dying if her situation felt desperate enough. Such stories began to pile up. Another veteran, a woman named Kelsey Sharon, claims she knows numerous fellow ex-service members who also had medical assistance in dying, raised as an option by the same government department. Sharon, outraged, has publicly called it disgusting and unacceptable. For her, and for a growing chorus of critics, what we are seeing is the transformation of a tool originally designed for terminally ill individuals into an exit ramp that could be suggested for treatable mental health struggles. Dismissively offering to help a person end their life can come across, at best, as a misguided attempt at empathy and, at worst, as chilling evidence of an institutional willingness to sacrifice the well-being of veterans in favor of cost-saving or convenience. Speaking of cost-saving, as you can imagine, the suspicion that euthanasia might be a cheaper alternative than providing lifelong support is extremely triggering for both service members and civilians. No one wants to think that they are treated as if they are an inconvenient expense. That sense of betrayal resonates in the words of yet another ex-soldier who described the feeling as if the government were saying, "We cannot really fix you, so perhaps think about taking the final bow." Even if that is not the official stance of Veterans Affairs Canada, these repeated accounts, even if anecdotal, are fueling a powerful wave of distrust. If that is striking you as both horrifying and bizarre, it is supposed to. How do we reconcile the idea that a comparatively progressive country could be stumbling through such a harrowing moral quandary? Well, let us peel back the layers. When Canada legalized euthanasia back in the second half of the 2010s, it was widely touted as an act of compassion for individuals with no hope of recovery from devastating illnesses. Over time, however, the scope has broadened in practice, leaving many to wonder whether the protective lines have blurred. Some critics argue that once the door is opened, allowing doctors to end the life of a suffering person under certain conditions, it can lead to a steady normalization of that practice and, eventually, pressure to include more categories of people who might direct or request euthanasia. But is that gloom and doom perspective correct? Let us step briefly into the worldview of the expansions. Advocates say that this was always about bodily autonomy. If someone is experiencing extreme torment, either physical or mental, and with no realistic chance of that ever being alleviated, they should have the right to exit on their own terms. The problem is not necessarily the intention. The problem arises when people seeking actual solutions for issues that, while deeply troubling, may still be treatable in the long run, start being told that ending their life is a real choice. Throw into the mix a bureaucracy that might have overworked staff just trying to expedite cases, and you create a situation rife with the possibility of unconscionable solutions. This phenomenon is not confined to one or two isolated episodes. The ripple effects are spanning beyond Canadian borders, catching the attention of lawmakers in the United Kingdom. Enter Conservative Member of Parliament Tom Tugendhat, who publicly expressed grave concern about the direction euthanasia was heading in Canada. He specifically cited a story about a soldier with post-traumatic stress disorder being steered toward assisted suicide rather than receiving the top-tier mental health interventions required. His words were somewhat forceful. If a person is not granted proper care and is told that death might be their best shot, that is fundamentally wrong, and it is something he will never support. It is easy to see why the debate is intense. People in the United Kingdom, for example, may wonder if legalizing euthanasia there would lead to a slippery slope that ends like this: veterans, the elderly, or those with chronic mental afflictions receiving suggestions that it might be best to simply give up. In fact, certain experts in bioethics, like Trudeau Lemons, a professor of law at the University of Toronto, started speaking out about these concerns. While Lemons initially supported the euthanasia law, he now believes the expansions have pushed us into treacherous water. He warns that there is a worryingly quick normalization process that can happen within the medical community once such measures become part of mainstream practice. That evolving acceptance, Lemons insists, does not happen overnight. Instead, it creeps in bit by bit, fueled by some well-intentioned doctors who want to respect autonomy and by advocates who push for broader definitions of suffering. Before long, stories like those of Ms. Gautier or Mr. Baltzer emerge, a chilling testament to how quickly the narrative can shift from "we want to help people in intolerable pain who are near death" to "we might offer euthanasia to physically stable individuals experiencing mental or psychological anguish." This intensifying conversation is, without a doubt, giving impetus to debates in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, and even beyond. The push for legislation such as the Terminally Ill Adults End-of-Life Bill, championed by Kim Leadbeater, has supporters and opponents. On one side are those deeply moved by the plight of patients who long for a dignified end when faced with terminal diagnoses that promise unstoppable misery. On the other side are those who worry about the unintended consequences. Can we be assured that vulnerable people, veterans or otherwise, will not face undue pressure to escape life's complications? After hearing these stories, one might fairly ask, is this truly a reflection of Canadian policy, or are these just shocking anomalies? Some officials, shocked by these testimonies, claim that any suggestion of euthanasia to veterans who phone in is deeply wrong and absolutely outside the guidelines. Yet the frequency with which these accounts are cropping up has forced the government to investigate. With each new voice stepping forward, the notion that these are mere coincidences loses credibility. Instead, it shines a glaring spotlight on the possibility of an institutional problem, a system so overburdened or disjointed that some of its agents might see offering death as a solution, rather than taking the grueling road of supporting an individual's mental health journey. By this point in the narrative, if you find yourself feeling a swirl of emotions, heartbreak, indignation, or just pure disbelief, that is the exact reaction many affected veterans had. Let us take a brief pause, though, because we are about to delve even deeper. And I encourage you, friendly listener, to let me know if content like this resonates with you. If you are appalled by what these veterans have gone through, do share your thoughts or consider showing your support. It is a small but meaningful gesture that can help us stand alongside those who have felt unheard. So, if you feel compelled, please leave a like or share your perspective in the comments, because every voice in this conversation helps maintain accountability. All right, back to the heart of the story. How did we arrive at a place where a veteran with PTSD, calling after multiple fruitless attempts to heal, might hear from the other end of the line, "Have you considered euthanasia?" The short answer might be that, in the pursuit of offering every possible option to end suffering, some lines have been crossed. On a deeper level, it is quite possible that certain individuals within Veterans Affairs Canada, seeing the heartbreak of repeated failures to navigate mental anguish, may genuinely have considered euthanasia as a merciful alternative. Another angle is that the system, somewhat famously, did not funnel enough resources into robust mental health support for veterans. The war in Afghanistan, which lasted many years, left a legion of men and women struggling. Untreated emotional trauma can mar an entire lifetime. Without enough therapy, subsidized programs, or specialized rehab, a sense of hopelessness can dominate the conversation. This begs the question, should we be focusing on refining euthanasia laws or on bolstering comprehensive mental health care? People quite rightly raise the point that if the system equates suffering from PTSD with being irreparably broken, then the system has failed. In the fervent words of certain outraged critics, offering to help someone pull the plug, so to speak, is an admission that we have turned away from the time-consuming, expensive, and deeply human effort required to guide them toward healing. On top of that, the prospect of euthanasia for mental health conditions alone remains a thunderous debate. Some fear it could open a Pandora's box, normalizing the viewpoint that certain lives are less worth living. Others counter that, for individuals with unbearable psychiatric conditions or inescapable physical ailments, the option should be available. Yet, to hear personal stories of random phone calls from Veterans Affairs Canada agents, or mention of euthanasia devices being offered in writing, is enough to cause even advocates of assisted dying to do a double take. Let us pivot to how certain members of the Canadian Parliament and public figures have responded. Officially, the government has promised to take negative experiences very seriously, but some remain unconvinced, citing the repeated nature of these complaints and, in their eyes, inadequate attempts at accountability. Veterans themselves often say that they do not just need an apology, but a sweeping reform that ensures no one in an emotionally vulnerable state is nudged toward irreversible decisions. Each time a new story surfaces, the public outcry flares anew, forcing politicians to scramble for explanations and new assurances. To further highlight how massive this can get, consider that the interplay between euthanasia laws and mental health resources extends far beyond the paramilitary or military sphere. Seniors, disabled citizens, and those with chronic pain conditions have also famously wrestled with the question of how accessible euthanasia should be. Cases have arisen where individuals request death because they cannot afford the equipment or assistance needed to live with dignity. This raises the disturbing possibility that, when faced with no feasible alternative, some see assisted dying as the least miserable path. It is a moral conundrum that forces us to scrutinize the responsibilities of a developed society. Are we so quick to offer someone an out because we lack the will to support them in living? But let us not get adrift. We are focusing specifically on the men and women who served. The revelations from veterans like David Baltzer and Christine Gauthier highlight an institutional approach that might be overstepping its bounds. Words matter. When you are on the phone with someone who contemplates whether life is worth living, the difference between hope and despair can hinge on the nuance of what is said. Telling them that they might consider euthanasia, especially in a casual or offhand manner, can profoundly shape their emotional landscape. That is the true tragedy. These heroes risk their lives for freedom's sake, only to come home and discover that the system is not just cracking at the seams, but in some horrific instances, overshadowing mental health support with final exit strategies. All eyes, then, turn toward how the rest of the world is absorbing this cautionary tale. Lawmakers in the United Kingdom are certainly among those watchers. And as the terminally ill adults' end-of-life bill moves through parliamentary processes, dissenting voices are citing the Canadian fiasco as a richly detailed caution sign. Do we want that here, they ask? If we open the door even a crack, how far could it swing? Meanwhile, some supporters of the bill in the UK claim that Canada's misapplication does not reflect the bill's true aims, that euthanasia or assisted dying legislation, when carefully written, can avoid such abuses. The tension that results is a critical moment in public discourse around assisted dying. Is it a moral victory that grants dignity to the suffering, or a slippery path toward offering death to those who truly need emotional and financial support? In many ways, this question can trigger deeply personal reflections in anyone who has ever navigated a mental health crisis or cared for a loved one in excruciating pain. The Canadian veteran scandal, if one may call it that, underscores all the possible pitfalls: insufficient mental health services, bureaucratic overreach, and the moral hazards of cost-saving measures. Some voices from the Right to Life UK organization argue that once euthanasia is normalized, it can easily spread into contexts never originally imagined by its initial legislation. Their spokesperson, Catherine Robinson, passionately states that once we allow such laws, we have to keep a vigilant eye on how they might be twisted, or how they might quietly bleed into everyday medical discourse. That vigilance, in the eyes of many observers, is precisely what has been lacking so far. Baltic voices from the front lines, for instance veterans who had real conversations with Veterans Affairs Canada staff, are no mere outliers. They represent a painful reality for those who are waiting for good counseling, psychological therapy, or at the very least, a compassionate ear. Without greater oversight, even more vulnerable individuals might conclude that the national conversation about their well-being yields no real answer beyond death. The moral imperative in a modern society should be to protect and uplift those dealing with crippling mental conditions. Confusing them with euthanasia options may indeed be an ultimate betrayal. Whether you are a journalist, a friend of a veteran, or simply a concerned citizen, the question remains: how do we hold the system accountable to ensure it heals rather than harms? This tragedy transcends national borders because the impetus to care for veterans is universal. People in many countries look to Canada as an example of progressive values that cradle those in need. But if even Canada experiences an apparently misguided extension of euthanasia practices, that signals to the rest of the world just how fragile and slippery the slope can be. And do not worry, our exploration does not end in gloom, because shining a light on these stories is the first step toward meaningful change. We can hope that these repeated disclosures serve as a rallying cry, that in all conversations about assisted dying, we maintain a laser focus on robust mental health resources, unwavering empathy, and the fundamental value of continuing to support human life. Not every individual who is suffering from PTSD or depression is beyond help. No matter how insurmountable it may feel in the short term, therapy, community support, and medical interventions can lead to genuine improvements. So, if you have found this story riveting and you want to help shape a future in which veterans receive care that is consistent, compassionate, and life-affirming, go ahead and subscribe to stay connected with these ongoing discussions. It is only with ongoing engagement that we can keep track of critical policy decisions. In concluding, we might do well to remember that the men and women who answer the call to serve do so with bravery and conviction. When they return from the battlefield, that same society owes them more than an abrupt medical solution. If euthanasia was intended as a last resort for cases of incurable physical agony, then stories of veterans with treatable psychological wounds being nudged toward death must serve as an urgent reminder to re-examine this legislation. As the debate continues, in the United Kingdom, in Canada, and around the globe, let us not lose sight of those who have already been impacted, like Ms. Gauthier or Mr. Baltzer. Their raw testimonies are a reminder that behind every phone call to Veterans Affairs lies a story of personal sacrifice and unwavering dedication. With enough compassionate diligence, we can ensure that the conversation around euthanasia never eclipses the top priority, helping people to truly live. Whether or not legislation moves forward, whether or not expansions continue, what must remain unwavering is our commitment to see these veterans through. Their mission now is to heal from the wounds of conflict, and it is our duty to stand for them when they are at their lowest. In the end, that is what it truly means to honor those who serve.